Police officers of Reddit, what are you thinking when you see cases like George Floyd? I'm a police officer in a medium-sized suburban town in Texas. I have been in law enforcement for 14 years. I love my job. I love how I get to help people, and I love how I get to cause positive changes in people's lives. I love how 99.9% of the time, my badge is shiny. Today my badge is not shiny. I'm tired of hearing the excuses given by other people for a police officer's misconduct. I'm tired of excuses being made for people who tarnish my badge. I'm so tired of hearing how officers have a stressful job and their misconduct was a result of that stress. You know who else is under stress? The people who called us. That person whose loved one just committed suicide. The family who called us because they found grandma dead, and now we are asking everyone questions. The 7 to 11 clerk who just had a gun shoved in his face. And even the guy we just put in handcuffs and told him he is losing his freedom. Sorry, but our stress is low compared to these folks. We might have to go into these situations, but we get to leave them and pretend none of that shit ever happened after our shift is over. I'm tired of hearing excuses for the bad police officers. I'm tired of the excuse, well, he puts his life in danger. Sure, I know we put our lives in danger. I've had guns, knives and even swords pulled on me. I've responded to bomb threats, suicidal subjects, assaults in progress, robberies in progress, etc. You know who else puts their lives in danger? Firefighters, deep sea fishermen, loggers, people who step foot outside their homes in Chicago. We are trained to deal with danger. We are provided with equipment and training to help us survive those dangers. Do I face an increased risk of not going home? Sure, but that's why I'm at an increased level of awareness at work, so I can respond to threats appropriately without panic and over-responding. I'm tired of hearing about the thin blue line. I believe in the thin blue line. I believe in looking out for my fellow officers. I don't believe in hiding the misconduct or unlawfulness of other officers, and I have always spoken up. What many forget, standing behind the thin blue line doesn't mean concealing the misconduct of other officers. It means confronting those officers so they don't do something to ruin their lives, the lives of others, or violate the law or code of conduct. It means walking up to the officer with his knee on a suspect's neck and saying, "Dude, this is too much. Stop," before the officer commits murder. It means walking up to the officer who has been drinking all night and saying, "Dude, I'll give you a ride home." Instead of hiding misconduct, prevent it. Help your fellow officer not do something to ruin his life or another's life. If you do see misconduct, address it. Take it to the appropriate level. Stop tarnishing my badge. We took an oath to uphold the law, uphold our ethics, and protect our communities. Sometimes that means arresting other police officers or holding them accountable for policy/ethics violations. This officer violated the rights of George Floyd and murdered him through his actions. The officers who were on scene and failed to act are just as responsible. There are multiple videos of this incident and there is no real question as to what happened. For those folks who wonder what makes it murder or manslaughter, murder is the act of causing death to another human being through an action which a reasonable person would know or intend could result in the death of the victim. Manslaughter is the act of causing death through an act which is reckless in nature. Every officer in America is taught about positional asphyxiation, and while some departments allow neck restraints, all officers are taught the dangers of neck restraints and are taught not to apply pressure to the back of someone's neck or head when they are prone and out on the ground in handcuffs. Floyd was handcuffed with little resistance and they were able to walk him across the street to a patrol unit. Floyd can be seen in a surveillance video falling to the ground next to the unit on the sidewalk side of the unit. Cell phone footage then shows the officer on top of Floyd's neck on the opposite side of the unit, the street side. There is a random man in the background telling Floyd just to get in the car and he can't win. Floyd can be heard saying he knows and he's done. This implies that Floyd may have resisted or attempted to escape, but was still restrained in the handcuffs. Floyd can be heard multiple times saying he can't breathe. The cell phone video shows the officer kneeling on top of Floyd's neck for at least 8 minutes, with around 4 of those minutes with Floyd being unconscious. Even if Floyd did attempt to resist or escape, there was no reason to hold him down for 8 minutes. What was the point of restraining him for so long? Why did the other officer not assist the primary officer with restraining Floyd so they could get him in the patrol unit quicker? Why did the primary officer continue to restrain Floyd by his neck after Floyd became unresponsive? Why can the officer be heard at some point asking Floyd if he is still a tough guy? I can only come up with one answer to all of these questions, and that was the primary officer, Chauvin, wanted to prove to Floyd that Floyd was not such a tough guy. I see an officer assaulting another human being, going beyond taking control of a suspect, using force as punishment and ultimately causing the death of another human being. I see a second officer who stood and watched and did nothing, despite knowing that what the first officer was doing was a violation of law and policy. I see officers who were trying to get back at Floyd for running his mouth and resisting an arrest by using force they knew could result in death or serious bodily injury in a situation which did not justify using deadly force. This officer committed murder, plain and simple. This officer tarnished my badge and the badges of all police officers. Worst of all, this officer tortured his victim for 8 minutes. Imagine your last thoughts and memories being those of a police officer, a person who the public is supposed to be able to trust, placing his body weight on your neck, slowly asphyxiating you against hot asphalt, while he asks you if you're still a tough guy. I hope this officer, and any officer who allowed this to happen, is tried and convicted. It's going to be some time before I can polish my badge back to a shine. In the meantime, a family is suffering, a community is burning, all because of one guy who should have never been an officer. What do I think? I think assholes like this make my job that much harder and damage the trust I work so hard for. I think assholes like this ruin people's lives and ruin families. I think assholes like these should be stuck in a prison with all of the people they ever arrested. For all the police officers here, what would the charges be if one of the bystanders pulled the police officer off of the poor guy? Assault on a police officer, obstruction of justice, and probably resisting arrest, depending on state laws of course. That gets tossed in as an easy one to charge, but usually gets pled off in court. I fear that if someone had intervened, that version of the story never would have received publicity. Death is a much more weighty headline. It's hard to intervene when there's no visible precedent of it being effective, and there is a strong precedent of reactive brutality. I wish we had positive stories available on the news in which de-escalation worked, but in a similar way to flattening the curve, it's so much harder to count saved lives than lost ones. I'm a former police officer, and so have had plenty of training in physical restraint of individuals being arrested. There is no police academy training officers to kneel on someone's neck to subdue them. That's how you kill a person. There is extensive training on how to avoid seriously injuring a person while restraining them, and I guarantee you every one of these officers was trained to never strike a person in the neck or choke them. The officer who killed him is very clearly liable for manslaughter at the very least, and I think the other officers who stood by have some accountability as well, because they knew damn well that was not how you handle a person, and should have stepped up. Here's my question. Given that this officer was actively killing a man through an illegal use of force, what would have happened had a non-police officer stopped him? Granted, then the outcome wouldn't have killed the man, and thus there would have been no death to show that the use of force was obviously excessive. But that's the part that really makes me angry. Anyone who would have tried to stop this would have been arrested on the spot for assaulting an officer, even though the officer was literally murdering another human being. Lawyer here. While the literal text of most justification/necessity defenses would apply to using force in that situation, most likely the Good Samaritan would be charged with obstruction or interference with public duties. They would then have to convince a jury that there was no other reasonable recourse short of physical force. That's a tall order, and I'd be real nervous for my client. In a worst case scenario, our hypothetical Samaritan gets tased or shot or killed for their troubles. My thoughts? Record and verbally demand the officer stop is probably the wisest course. Absolutely sick to my stomach. I'm a lieutenant in my hometown police department. I started my day by showing the video to my officers and making sure my people understood that this is murder, plain and simple. You never, outside of a life and death struggle, do anything like this. George Floyd was handcuffed and on the ground. If he was still struggling badly enough that they felt a need to hold him down, There's 100 ways to do it safely. Use of force should always be as measured and considered as possible. There will always be times where an officer sees danger and has to make a split-second decision without the luxury of weighing the consequences. That clearly was not the case here. He had all the time in the world to think about what he was doing. He had multiple people there telling him to stop, and none of his fellow officers intervened. All of that is why I find this incident particularly disgusting. They had so many chances to do the right thing. Retired after 28 years. Nothing less than murder. All the guys I worked with would never have considered doing something like that. You treat combative in custodies once they are secured as human beings. Nothing should be personal. Once they've been subdued and you are safe as an officer, you stand him up, pat him down, and understand that your arrestee is at a low point in his life. Give him some dignity and you'll generally get his respect. It works 90+% of the time. That man was subdued and nobody should have been on him at that point. I'm a police officer in California. I'm absolutely disgusted by the officer's actions. When someone is in our custody, you must treat them properly. I don't care if they are arrested for murder or forgery. They are a human with a story and they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. I had tears streaming down my face watching the video of George Floyd. We swore to protect our communities and that's what we set out to do every day. Putting a knee into the neck of a handcuffed man for an extended period of time isn't protecting. A man has lost his life due to the gross negligence of an evil person. May he rest in peace. Cop here. Disgusted. There are 1,000 reasons why this shouldn't have happened. Simple, easy steps that should have been taken. Lessons that policing has learned over the past 200 years and basic things taught in every academy. Make no mistake, this was murder. Maybe not premeditated murder, but nonetheless murder. I will be angry if those officers do not get indicted. He's apparently been involved in at least 2 other deaths, including shooting a fleeing suspect in the back. I dunno, given that history, premeditation seems reasonable. Not a local. I'm a Fed 5 years into the job. George Floyd was murdered, and it's fucking disgusting. We are trained that anything involving the neck is a no-go and is considered deadly force. We were also trained that if you make an arrest in a prone position, you search and then immediately move them onto their side or a seated position, because the risk of asphyxiation is so great. If a suspect says they can't breathe, believe them and take measures to correct to it. This training is reinforced at least twice a year in our use of force training. These officers deserve to spend the rest of their lives in prison. I was a cop in the military. In the police academy, this was one of the things that taught us not to do, as it could crush the windpipe. The only time I was ever taught to use chokes and neck holds was in combat training for deployments. But when we got back, we always had to attend retraining classes to relearn what we can do stateside. It's amazing that time and time again you see military saying this is exactly not what to do, but for some reason the civilian trainers seem to forget to teach the same. Would I rather be a POW to an American soldier vs American cop? I'll take soldier every time. Sheriff's deputy here, and I must say that I'm disgusted by the unnecessary loss of life. There are moments that make me regret what I do, and this is one of them. I've met my share of racists wearing a badge, and I'm ready for a career change. The oath we take is to uphold the law and constitution. So for the officers on scene there that could have stepped in and prevented this, fuck you. One bad apple always ruins the bunch. Unfortunately, I pray for the George's family and that justice is served. Throw away for obvious reasons, and yes, I'm a white male. Edit. Wasn't expecting this to blow up as it has. I'm responding to you guys when I can, and I'm glad we can have a conversation about this. We do not unionize in my state for law enforcement, and I see many comments about systemic protection and abuse. I have never worked under a police union, but I have worked with people who were unionized, and I have heard my share of stories where law is protected by the union. Stories I hear are about union protection from bad leadership, but I can imagine those protections may extend further in cases such as this. As a son of a former police officer, my dad worked really hard to be an honest cop. His department was full of racists. They didn't like him because he was a decent cop. They couldn't do anything wrong on front of him. We saw the news together, and I saw him wipe a tear, but tried really hard to hide it. I know he's sad, and I don't wanna push him to talk about it, but we both know things like this is always gonna happen, and that is a really sad fact. I can't possibly understand why a human being would do something like this. I work for a US federal bureau, but am not a local police officer. All 4 cops need to go to jail. Derek Chauvin, the cop with the knee on George's neck, should have gone to jail long ago. The guy apparently has a history of doing this. This is his 3rd time in 15 years. Black people need to keep fighting, and white/Asian/Latino people need to support them. Justice for cases like this won't come easy, and it won't come soon. But if they keep fighting, I truly believe that one day, eventually, it will come. My former local precinct, they did nothing except eat pizza and hang out at the gas station across from where this happened. Their whole precinct needs to be investigated. They were never bothered with doing their job. I have a good friend that is a cop. We had a long discussion about good cops vs bad cops. I made the point that the bad cops seem to be able to get away with bad behavior all the time. They are never treated like everyone else, and police departments seem to bend over backwards to protect them. He said to the effect, well, it's a hard job and we all need to know the other guy has our back. If we turn on each other like that, then it destroys the trust. My response was basically, if that's the truth, then there is no such thing as good cops. If good cops protect the bad ones instead of going after them harder than they do other people, then they are worse than the crooked cops. If you're a cop, then just do your fucking job. It doesn't matter if the guy is wearing a badge or not. If he's a piece of shit criminal, then arrest that piece of shit and put his ass away. I worked in a place where the population was about 75% black. As a white cop, I very quickly learned a lot about being respectful and how to be tactful. Humor goes a long way, and it's very important not to give off any sign of being fearful. They can sense it. You get used to shouts of abuse as you drive by, and guys on the corner will try to provoke you by openly drinking beer. Is it illegal? Yes, but you learn to pick your battles. If you do ever need to stop someone and question them, you know that if you take too long, you will suddenly find yourself surrounded by an angry crowd who have no idea what you are asking. People in these areas are almost always reluctant to even be seen conversing with a cop out of fear of being seen as a snitch. It is true that if you do need to make an arrest, there will almost always be some level of resistance, which makes things very difficult, as once you have made the commitment to make the arrest, you have to go through with it. I'm not in any way making excuses for the cops in this particular video, but it isn't easy. However, the cop with his knee on the poor guy appears to be of the alpha male type of cop. These guys are bullies by nature and very difficult to work with if you personally police to different standards. It's very difficult to intervene as a partner, as you will likely be ostracized. You take this route and your career is over. Your social life is over. Your marriage will have problems, as cop families are pretty close. Since we are tapping into the police community here, can someone please explain what, if anything, the bystanders could have done to help George Floyd? Call 911 and report police brutality? In all seriousness, what is the preventative action here, since none of the police officers on the scene, 4 of which were physically restraining him, reacted to his being murdered right in front of them? Edit. In summary, some of the options proposed are below. I apologize if I omitted, misrepresented, or oversimplified anything. The bystanders in this case did many of these things, and they were a voice for George when he couldn't speak for himself. Always record the incident, live streaming if possible, and inform the police they are being recorded. Involve other authorities when applicable, such as police supervisors, state police. 911. Ask for supervisor and an ambulance to report immediately. ACLU, FBI. Tell the officers on site that you are involving other authorities. Escalation. Back any crowd or bystanders away from the scene and officers while still being able to record the incident. Have one person, preferably a white person, attempt to approach the officer or officers as a medical professional or voice of reason to explain that it appears that medical treatment may be required, and remind the officer or officers that their best interests, career, family, reputation etc. are to act responsibly. Create a diversion/distraction that requires the officers to release the hold, not custody, of anyone in imminent medical danger. Physically remove the threat imposed by the officer or officers by force. This includes exercising your right to carry and discharge a gun. I think everyone agrees that this option will most likely result in physical, potentially fatal, and legal ramifications for the individual or individuals involved, unless the group of bystanders are organized enough and outnumber the officers on the scene to the extent that they can safely take control without further harm. Systemic change. Vote, local and national, for people that value human life and will implement change to protect it. This is not an anti-gun sentiment. If you value your right to carry a gun, then vote for people that support that. Be vocal in demanding justice when these incidents occur. Push for improved training, hiring practices, and accountability within the police force. I would imagine that this may also include increasing pay for the police force to attract more suitable individuals into the positions. Possibly implement a citizen-based governing body to oversee the police force and their actions.